For decades, advisory relationships have been built on authority. Credentials, confidence, and experience were expected to be enough. But we're now operating in an era of skepticism, not deference. Clients don't automatically trust expertise anymore. They audit it. This presentation is about that shift. It's about moving from authority as the foundation of trust to clarity as the foundation of trust, and why modern advisory can no longer survive without it. I am Steve Koleno, and this is Confidential Remarks. There is an unspoken premise embedded in traditional advisory models that homeowners are not qualified to judge expert advice. The logic is simple. If the client can't understand the mechanics, they must rely on the expert's authority. This belief has shaped how advice is delivered, how decisions are justified, and how trust is maintained. But this premise only holds if the system itself remains opaque. In a closed system, inputs go in and advice comes out. But the logic in between is hidden. The client receives conclusions without visibility into how those conclusions were formed. When the process is concealed, the client is rendered unqualified by design. Not because they lack intelligence, but because the system withholds the information required to evaluate the advice. Closed systems don't just hide calculations. They omit incentives, alternatives, trade-offs, and exclusions. These are not minor details. They are the pillars of informed decision-making. When any of these are concealed, the fiduciary relationship is incomplete. The client isn't choosing with full awareness, they're complying with partial information. When inputs are hidden, trust shifts away from process and onto personality. The client is forced to trust the person rather than the work. That kind of trust is fragile. It holds only as long as confidence, charisma, or reputation remains intact. The moment personality falters, trust collapses because it was never anchored to evidence. Open access flips the model. Instead of asking homeowners to judge expertise, we give them access to the record. Inputs, logic, and outputs are visible inside a glass box. This is not about dumbing down advice. It's about revealing the architecture behind it. Transparency replaces opacity as the trust mechanism. In the traditional role, the advisor steers outcomes based on private judgment. In open access, the advisor explains consequences based on visible data. The advisor is no longer the captain demanding obedience. They become the navigator showing the map. Authority doesn't disappear. It's repositioned. Radical disclosure means there is no back end. Compensation, incentives, representations, and referral economics are placed on the table before advice is rendered. Nothing is implied. Nothing is assumed. When everything is visible, trust no longer depends on belief. It depends on verification. Open access mandates that multiple paths are presented, not just the preferred one. The client sees the full landscape of options, including the consequences of each. This allows them to understand not just what is recommended, but why it is recommended. Preference becomes informed, not guided. The homeowner stops playing agent. Instead, they evaluate inputs, market data, timing, risk factors, financing options, and constraints. The client is no longer judging the advisor as a person. They're judging the quality of the information provided by that person. In every other high-stakes profession, consumers evaluate inputs. Investors review allocations. Clients review legal strategy. Patients review treatment options. Real estate advisory is simply catching up to the standard of care already expected elsewhere. Transparency does not eliminate the need for expertise. It validates it. Under open access, expertise is no longer claimed. It's audited. When the work is visible, confidence becomes earned, not requested. The client becomes the CEO. They make the final decision. The advisor becomes the CFO, responsible for rigorous data, risk assessment, and financial context. The power dynamic shifts from permission to empowerment without sacrificing professionalism. Closed systems rely on authority. Trust me because I say so. Open access relies on clarity. Trust me because you can see the work. One demands belief, the other earns confidence. In an era of skepticism, authority alone is no longer a viable currency. Clarity is. When advice is visible, trust becomes durable. This is the open access standard, and it's no longer optional.